Welcome, everybody. As Mary was saying, this is the first in a three-part series of workshops on climate storytelling. And my name is Kelly Hydrick. I'm program manager at Climate Stories Project. I'm here with Jason Davis, who's the director. We do have our emails up on the slides. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at any time. And just a quick overview of the whole series. So today we'll be talking about what exactly is climate storytelling, and we'll have a few examples of climate stories, and we'll help you get started with crafting your own climate story. Our next workshop on the 31st will be more about conducting climate story interviews and interviewing skills, and we'll also discuss a little bit about leveraging climate storytelling for positive change in leadership. And our final workshop on April 28th is going to be working through climate-related emotions and potential trauma that can come up. And we'll also have a chance to share successes and challenges with doing this kind of storytelling work. And a little bit more about what we'll do today. So like I said, we'll talk about what a climate story is and also why it's so important to share them. We'll listen to a couple of examples of climate stories, and we'll also introduce you to a framework for climate storytelling that you can use to get started writing your own stories. And towards the end of our workshop today, we'll get a little bit more interactive and give you some time to sketch out your own climate stories, and we'll have time at the very end to sort of debrief how that went. And if you would like to, you can feel free to share your story with the group. And to kind of get us started, I'm really interested to hear if anyone here today has talked recently about climate change, either with your friends or family or anyone else, maybe colleagues at work. And who did you talk to, and what did you talk about, and how did it go? Please feel free to unmute yourself. You can put some comments in the chat if that's more comfortable for you. But yeah, has anyone talked recently about climate change with anyone else? I think it's interesting. I feel a lot of times when you start to talk about climate, you get moving pretty quickly, and it can go in a lot of different directions. And I see Sumaya in the chat said that she hasn't explicitly spoken to anyone about climate change, but attended a poetry reading in Astoria, Queens, where a poet shared poems from his climate change poetry book. And he spoke about how light pollution affects migratory birds on the East Coast. So yeah, great.
All right, so maybe we should move on to the next. Yeah, just so you know, I put in the chat our website, it's just www.climatestoriesproject.org if you want to take a look at what we do, and we'll certainly refer back to that as we go. So what's a climate story? The way we define it is the intersection of your life and climate change. So if you think about all the things that link up your life, like your culture, your identity, your home place, your emotions, your observations of change, those all link to climate change in some way. And you can start drawing out your climate story by thinking about what part of these elements really speak to you and how you can create a story out of those. And just a couple guidelines that help you create an effective climate story is that first, a climate story is based on I statements. So statements in the first person coming from your own perspective. So this can be hard because often we talk about climate change in the third person. So climate change is scary, climate change is happening, climate change is this or that. But for our climate story, you really want to flip it around. So now you're saying things like, I remember this, I've observed this, I feel this. And this really brings things to the personal level, and that's really where we want to start with our climate stories. Another important consideration, which you've learned if you've ever taken a writing class, is a climate story uses specific imagery and sensory descriptions. So rather than just talking about climate change in the abstract as a global issue, which is sort of the normal way we talk about it, how do you bring climate change into a concrete experience on the ground level? So that could be something like, what does climate change look like in your neighborhood? What does it feel like to you? And for me, the most exciting example I heard about this, I worked in a little Inuit community called Shishmaref, Alaska, which is really ground zero for climate change. They're located on a barrier island on the Bering Sea, and the village used to be surrounded by sea ice, but because of warming water temperatures, a lot of that sea ice is now gone. So now you have winter storms coming, washing up on the beaches, a lot of erosion. So buildings have been destroyed, a lot of damage to infrastructure. There's also been a lot of permafrost melt, so that's the frozen ground, and all that's caused buildings and, say, sewer lines to be damaged. And it's gotten bad enough that people in the village actually voted to relocate from this small island onto mainland Alaska. It hasn't happened yet because, as you can imagine, it's a huge logistical issue, very, very expensive. But this kind of extreme impacts of climate change is happening all up and down the Alaskan coast in these Inuit villages. So I wanted to work there. I wanted to do something with climate storytelling. This goes back a few years. So I called up some people in the community and I said, hey, can I come work there and do this climate storytelling projects? And one of the teachers there said, sure, we're teaching about climate change in my class. Why don't you come, stay a week or so and do your project? So I was up there, I was working with a small group of high school students that were learning about climate change in Shishmaref by interviewing their elders. So aunts and uncles, grandparents, and they did a great job just learning about what's in an interview, how to talk to people in different ways, and then just about the details of climate change. And I also did a few of my own interviews while I was up there. And one of the last people I interviewed was an Inuit elder named John Sinek. And he talked about just these amazing details about what climate change really looks like and feels like. So like ice conditions and the wind directions, fish populations have changed. All these really, really intimate details of climate change in this village. And the thing he said that really got my attention is that climate change has a particular sound. I'm a musician also, so I've made a lot of music pieces that use people's spoken words in music pieces. So those are also on the Climate Stories Project website. But back to the interview, John Sinek mentioned that when he was a child, he remembered that the sound of people walking through the snow was very sharp and crunchy because the snow was so cold and so dry. And now that it's warmed up, the snow's wetter and it doesn't make that same sound anymore. So it's a way of describing climate change through sound, which to me was just so incredible. So I asked Mr. Sinek if I could use his recorded voice in these music pieces. And we don't have time to play one today, but again, it's on the Climate Stories Project website if you want to have a listen to some of my music using climate stories. So let's listen to a little excerpt from John Sinek's interview where he uses this really interesting specific sensory detail about the change in climate.
So a little bit about our village here. Back when I was young, we have always had north wind all the time, and we would have blizzards and cold north winds for a good month. But after that, we would have real nice weathers for at least a month or over a month after that, where people can go out and hunt and get ice for drinking water. And it would be like that for a long time. And then when the snow gets so cold and dry that you can hear people walking outside. You could hear their footsteps outside because you can hear the crunch real easy on the snow. Nowadays, it doesn't get that hard anymore where you can hear people walking past. The snow doesn't get that hard dry anymore like it used to.
So just a really vivid portrait of climate change and the local level. So you might start thinking about what is climate, how can you describe climate change in maybe a unique way or a novel way from your experience?
And, the thing about climate stories, you do not have to be an Inuit elder to have a climate story. Literally everyone has a climate story, regardless of age, race, gender, geographic location. Everyone has a climate story. Climate change is something that everyone on the planet is dealing with. It is important to keep in mind, though, that the effects of climate change are most certainly spread unevenly. So it is marginalized people and communities that are feeling the brunt of climate change right now. Even though they've had the least to do historically with the creation of this issue. Climate stories, when we say everyone has a climate story, they can be about someone's direct experience with climate change. So, a flood or a wildfire, but they can also be about, your emotional response to just the knowledge that the climate crisis is happening. And climate stories can also be about how interpersonal relationships or community relationships are changing because of climate change. And, there's also stories of hope and stories of people who are working for a better future and imagining a better future, that sort of thing. So, if you haven't had a chance yet, we have so many different stories on our website that please feel free to go and check them out, and you can kind of see the variety of different stories that people have recorded and submitted.
There's also a Google map where if you want to just hunt around and click on a few spots, you can link up to those stories.
So why should you share your climate story? I've had people ask me this question, and why do you do climate interviews? What's the point? And it's a good question. And I think, speaking about climate change from a personal perspective is really important towards building this, broader and more equitable climate movement that will be more successful. A lot of people are used to hearing about climate change, as Jason was saying, climate change is happening, or in terms of data or numbers and from the scientific perspective. And those perspectives are certainly needed, but it can be sometimes a little bit abstract and hard for people to connect to. But people are really hardwired for stories and for storytelling, and this is what gets us to connect to others. So storytelling can be a really important tool, especially when it comes to talking about some really difficult issues like climate change. Storytelling can raise marginalized voices and can really highlight climate injustice, because it is marginalized communities that are most impacted right now by climate change. And personal climate stories can really help break down barriers and can lead to some really important and productive conversations about the climate crisis and potential action at all different kinds of levels, from the local to the national to the international. And storytelling can, again, help to kind of bridge the disconnect between the science of climate change and what's actually happening in people's everyday lives. These personal climate stories also can help us see that in addition to being a somewhat scientific issue in ways, climate change is also a very personal and a very, it's a human rights issue. And these personal stories can help us to highlight that and to get people to be more aware of that. So now we'd kind of like to change gears a little bit and get you all involved in starting to write your own climate story. We're going to introduce the 3 writing prompts that we've come up with, and these prompts are designed to kind of help you to start thinking about climate change from the more personal perspective, like we've been talking about. So we'll introduce the 3 writing prompts over the next few slides, and then we'll listen to another example of a climate story. And finally, we'll give you time to write or to draw or to type or just sort of brainstorm and start your own climate story. So the first prompt that we have for you all is, what do you care about in your home place or community, and how is it threatened by the changing climate? And it might be helpful to kind of think about this, there was a study done in 2018 by Susie Wong, and she uses the term objects of care. So what are some objects, and objects being people, places, seasons, foods? What are some things that you care about in your community that will change or are changing due to climate change? And by the way, we'll have all of these prompts up on the screen when we give you writing time, so you don't need to write them down now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to add on a little bit to that, Kelly, getting back to the idea of climate change being abstract and hard to pin down, by placing your climate story in place, it's a good way to ground your story in reality. So rather than just starting about climate change on the global scale, you're really putting it in place. And we care about climate change not because it's climate change, but because it is impacting people we care about, places we care about. And that's a really powerful way to start your story. So prompt 2 is emotional responses. So what are your emotional responses to climate change, and why do you have these responses? So we know from research that we actually need to tap into our emotions to make good decisions. So especially with an issue like climate change, where it's been so emphasized about technology, policy, for example, and those are important. We do need to change our political system or economic system, and technology certainly has a role to play. But we also need to move climate change just from an issue in our heads into our hearts. And this is going to help us build a stronger climate movement and activate our motivation more for confronting climate change. Almost certainly you have a range of emotions when you tap into them about climate change, ranging from fear and grief. We've heard a lot about anxiety, which certainly I'm experiencing, and I imagine many, if not all of you, are experiencing. So this is a very normal response to a challenging situation. Sadness, for sure. Anger, sometimes we want to push anger away as, say, a negative emotion, but certainly in this case, it's completely valid. Thinking about things like the fossil fuel industry, which for decades has known about climate change, even through their own scientific research, but chose to push that aside and perpetuate this lie that it's not real or it's so disputed. So I'm certainly angry about that, and I imagine some of you are as well. Confusion, so there's a lot of possibilities. It's not like the future is already written, and that's confusing. There's things that are that could happen, that might be happening. You might be just not know what to do, not know what to talk about. It could be very confusing. We do hear a lot about hope, and I think hope is necessary. I like to talk about active hope, which means we need to be engaged to create a better future, and it's not enough just to hope things that will get better on their own. Excitement. So you might be excited that there are some evidence of things changing already and more to come in the future. You can also think about love, and we need love for each other. We need love for the environment, for the planet, for our communities, to build motivation to confront climate change. So once again, most likely it's a range of emotions. So part of your climate story is thinking about that and really feeling that range and writing about them. Prompt 3 is about motivation. So why are you motivated to confront climate change? You can also think about how do you envision a more positive future, and how can you contribute to a positive way forward? So motivation is also a really important aspect of climate storytelling. And this comes up, some people will say, oh, well, my uncle doesn't believe in climate change. And how do you deal with that? And people say, well, I try to argue with him and it doesn't work. And we end up just not talking about it. It doesn't work very well, but an effective way to engage other people is say, well, here's why I care about climate change. And it could be something very simple about talking about the weather being uneven, and maybe you like skiing and that's no longer possible. So then you have an opening in a conversation because you're talking about things that you believe in and that you care about, and no one can say, no, that's not true, and you don't get into this political argument. So motivation can really draw people into your experience and help other people also tap into their experience. it's not here in the slide, but thinking about a more positive future and envisioning that's a great way to push things forward. And even with your community, you can talk to community members and envision what do we want as a community to have to create a more positive future. So maybe that's things around climate resilience, like local agricultural projects, solar energy, community groups. It sounds like a lot of this is happening in New York already, so that's fantastic. So a more positive future, and how can you contribute to a more positive way forward? This can take a lot of forms, and certainly we don't want to give the impression that it's only individual actions and you're responsible for changing your lifestyle. There's nothing wrong with lifestyle choices, but we like to emphasize collective action and collective engagement. So this could take a lot of forms. It could be community sustainability projects. If you want to get engaged with politics, that's totally important. And a really simple way to say use your climate story is just to write a letter to your elected official, which you use your climate story, and you say, it's not just climate change is bad, but here's why I'm concerned about climate change, and here's my climate story. Just talking about climate change is really important. So having those everyday conversations helps normalize climate change in the social realm. Protest, I'm not a protest person, but I have a lot of respect for people that go out in the street and make noise and tie themselves to pipelines. We need that direct action as well. So this is going to be different for everybody. Okay, so before we get to the brainstorming writing section, I just wanted to play a really nice, I think, an effective climate story. This is from an activist based in Washington, D.C. named Matt Scott. And he shared this a few years ago with Climate Stories Project. And I think he just did a really nice job, if you can call it that, of putting things in the I statements, first person statements, using sensory details in his climate story, talking about his objects of care, like people he cares about, engaging with how you can make a positive future. So a nice example of a climate story. Let's have a listen.
Hi, my name is Matt Scott. I'm 28. I live in Washington, D.C. And right now I'm actually just outside the city at Great Falls Park in Virginia. And when people think of Washington, D.C., they often think of the monuments and politics and the tourist destinations, but they won't necessarily think of all of the green areas we have. And in DC, while I live right off of Rock Creek Park, which spans the city and really takes up so much of the city, I actually decided to come out today to enjoy one of our other beautiful green areas. I think I first started to experience the impacts of climate change in my experience of DC in 2010 when I moved to DC, because that summer I remember getting all the text notifications about the air alerts, the air quality, about the heat. And that's when I first truly experienced and was aware of the impacts, but I didn't really tie back those things to climate change and a bigger problem that we could really do something about. Since my first summer in DC, we've had 5 of DC's 6 hottest summers ever on record, and I think that's sad, and I want for people in general, but my nephew Micah, who's 2 years old, to grow up in a world where he can enjoy the natural environments like this and appreciate the nature and plant life and animals that make this world so beautiful and that we often overlook. I feel hopeful as a social impact project manager and storyteller, as the climate solutions storyteller at the organization Project Drawdown, and as someone who interviews hundreds of change makers, including through Let's Care, that there are people who are out here making an impact. That energy is out there. It's something we could tap into, and it's something that I plan on tapping into and helping others tap into to make an impact, because there's so many people who want to enjoy planet Earth, that want to have the benefit of this world as something that generations could still inhabit and build and benefit from and and share with their future generations. And that's not going to happen without all of us. It's an all hands on deck effort, and I'm really proud to be part of it. But for now, I'm going to enjoy this beautiful day. So thank you for watching, and thank you for listening to my climate story.
So I think just a really nice way of using some of these elements of climate storytelling, the sensory details, first-person perspective, emotional responses, objects or care, people that he cares about, how to make a positive future. So your climate story doesn't have to follow this script, say, in any way, shape, or form. So we're not saying that you must follow this template for climate storytelling. I just wanted to give an example of something I feel is effective. Okay, so now it's time to do your own. So you can do this on paper if you have that available, on your computer, on your laptop, or your phone. And you can just think about things that are meaningful to you. So if these prompts are not really speaking to you, and some experience you have or some feelings that you have are really drawing you, you can really focus on that. Storytelling is complex, and there's a lot of elements that make good stories. This is really just to get a start and to brainstorm and to start piecing this together. So certainly in this workshop, you're not expected to produce a quote unquote final product. It's really just a way to process information and to engage with climate change on this personal level. So it's a very open format, and it's more exploratory at this point than finished. So we'll leave the prompts up for you. Okay, so let's do it. I'll set the timer, and yeah, have fun. All right, so welcome back, everyone. We know that's really short time to do this, but again, it's just a start. So certainly you don't have to feel that it's not enough or you didn't get enough time in. So why don't we just go on?
Yeah, thanks everyone for starting your stories. But we do want to kind of check in with everyone as a group, and how did it go? How are you feeling after spending a little bit of time starting your climate story? Was it easy or difficult to begin? Did you face any particular challenges that you weren't expecting maybe, or was anything that you may have tried very helpful? So I invite anyone to either talk about these questions, and if you would like to, you can certainly share your story or the start of your story with the group. And if you feel more comfortable, you can put stuff in the chat as well.
Yeah, and anything you want to share is great. It's great for us to hear. I mean, I've heard all kinds of, over the years, amazing bits of storytelling and details and so forth. So we have about 5 minutes left. So yeah, and we feel really bad cutting people off. I will say there's an easy way to share your stories on that website. So I'll just briefly say, what I can do is very briefly just show you the on the website. This might be the easiest way to do it. Yeah, okay, so this is the Climate Stories Project. It's the wrong page in the Climate Stories Project website. This is the home page. If you want to share your story, we're thrilled to have that. Whatever works for you, is great. We do share audio or video stories, so we don't share written stories, and because there's actually a lot of other organizations doing that, so we chose to do audio or video. If you want to share a story, it's just the Share a Story tab right here, and share your climate story. So there's some tips here. We went through a lot of this in the workshop already. For recording, you can just use a smartphone and just record audio if you'd like to do that, and fill out this form here to give us permission to share your story. And just you can upload audio here. If you want to do video, just let us know, and we'll send you probably a Google Drive link to share that. We're working on a WhatsApp group. It's a bit nascent right now, but that hopefully will be another option to share with. If you share a audio story, we would love to see a photograph of yourself so we can put it on the website. No pressure there. I just wanted to give people an opportunity, because we really do want to hear your stories, and we have very limited time in this workshop.
So just really quickly, yeah, the next workshop will be about interviewing techniques if you want to go out and interview other people about their climate stories in your community. And the third and final workshop will be mostly working through climate-related emotions and touching on climate trauma, that sort of thing.
There's a lot here to unpack, so this is kind of a teaser about climate storytelling. There's a lot more information on the website, and we'd love to see you at these other workshops. It gives a nice perspective on communicating climate change and talking to other people, which, as we know, is extremely important.
And then our final slide is just basically our contact information. If you have any questions or comments about the workshop, or you need help with anything related to your climate stories, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help. And thank you so much all for being here.
Yeah, and thanks Mary and Davis for inviting us, and all of your hard work.